the world, and welcome to this particular panel, which is called Our Stories, Our Voices, and it showcases the shortlist group for the Zinat Haroon Writing Prize of 2020. The theme for the prize in 2020 was Women in Pakistan, and we have the winner of the prize, Rania Hussain, with us today, as well as the 5 people who made it to the shortlist with their wonderful, magnificent essays on what it is to be a woman in Pakistan and the experience of navigating space, of navigating relationships, of navigating yourself in the world. And I'm so excited to be having, which is going to be a wonderful conversation. We're going to have a little bit of reading, we're going to have a little bit of chat, and it's going to be super fun. My name is Mina Malik Hussain, and I am your moderator for today. So guys, when I was reading everybody's work, I felt like we could sort of take it in 3 streams, as it were. There's so many overlaps, which for me is magnificent because it really speaks to how much community we all share when we talk about our lives and we talk about ourselves and we talk about our lived experience. It's not extremely different from the other. And there are always bits, I think, that we can always draw strands. And it always reminds me of Ian Forster, who wrote about this, and he said, only connect. And that's the sort of great aim of literature and writing, is to connect people. So if we sort of look at it in 3 kind of broad categories for today, I was thinking we're looking at the body, we're looking at space, and we're looking at love and relationships. So I thought that we could begin with the body. And for that, I would love to have Sarah Khan, sort of come up to the metaphorical podium with me and talk to me a little bit about your essay. It's called Hairy, and it's wonderful. All of them are wonderful. I'll probably be saying this a lot. So Sarah, if you would like to read a little bit for us.
Yes, of course, I'd love to. So the part that I thought that I'd read today is actually from the end of the essay, and I'll just begin. You have always been on the fuzzy side, but you've convinced yourself that it is normal, that everyone has body hair, that it's just advertising and the patriarchy that makes women think they have to be follicle-free. At least, you convince yourself that no one notices because no one looks that close, except your mother. You have no trouble believing this most of the time because you don't look at your face in the mirror very often. You have educated yourself out of vanity, and you're just short-sighted enough that your face blurs smooth in a mirror. You try not to look at yourself when you're wearing glasses because then you can see what your mother sees, and it's harder to believe that no one else does. We have so much more feminism in this country now. Women talk about getting married later, about prioritizing their careers, about choosing who to marry, choosing religion, choosing to embrace their own skin, and all the shades of brown it comes in. An intersectional post-colonial feminist education is liberating. It contextualizes your oppression and tells you exactly how and when the British came to the subcontinent, apparently all white and superior, and compounded the local patriarchy with its imperial double standards. It's supposed to let you look at feminism on TV and the internet and take or leave the colonial bits. It's supposed to let you identify with Black women and brown women, to let you love the color of your skin, love the texture of your hair, love the shape of your body. But none of this matters to your mothers. To the mothers of your prospective husbands, to the semi-professional matchmakers invested in delivering you unto your final purpose, wifehood. You fight with your mother about this. Try to tell her why it's all arbitrary and immaterial. This is all well and good, she says, when you're white. Of course, Angrez women don't care what other people think of them. They live only for themselves. They might as well be men. And I'm sorry if this makes you feel bad, but there are women even hairier than you. You should be grateful it's not worse. Of course, who you are is more important, but you have to take care of yourself. You can't just completely let yourself go, not at your age. It doesn't look nice. No one looks good by doing nothing. You have to put in some effort. You have to look like you care. You feel like you are being unfair to your mother. She just wants you to look nice, and people find hairy women disgusting. You know this because you have to quell your own revulsion when you catch sight of your unwaxed ankles peeping out from under the hem of your shalwar. Years later, when you move to New York for grad school, where a wax costs as much as your monthly electricity bill, you will teach yourself how to wax. You will look at your blonde American friends Hate that you envy their hairless arms. Hate it worse when you realize they're not hairless, but that the soft blonde hair is practically invisible from a polite distance. What you will hate the most is that you noticed anyway. At the base of every shaft of hair, there is a concentration of a pigment called melanin. A laser-based depilation machine targets only melanin-rich cells, the beam overheating and destroying the follicle. There is usually a cooling mechanism attached: ice, gel, cool air, to soothe the skin. Dr. Lolly, that can't be his name, but you've given up now, has a machine that uses air to cool the burning skin he targets with the laser. He moves it quickly, covering area instead of looking for and targeting individual hair. You can feel the pressure of his thumb steadying your jaw, smell the acrid smoke from the singed hair. He's moving too quickly for the air to actually cool anything, and you can feel the stinging multiply in white-hot pinpricks, like so many rubber bands flicking your skin in rapid succession. He gives you no warning when he moves the beam to the soft flesh above your lip, and you feel yourself suddenly unable to breathe. There is too much air. It's like a hurricane trying to force its way into your skull, the cold air rushing up your nostrils at a frightening velocity, making you gasp and kick like you're drowning. He doesn't stop, but he doesn't linger longer than he has to. He might not even have noticed. When your lungs refill, the smell of burnt hair is stronger than ever. When it's over, the doctor wheels away and the man in the lab coat squirts a blob of moisturizer into your hands, almost before you're upright. Your face feels like it's on fire, and the lab coat man seems to know this because he slaps an ice pack into your outstretched palm with a casual, "Khayal rakhein." You watch your mother make your next appointment as you rub the cold, wet ice over your face. You don't look at her the entire way home because you feel a little soiled, a little like a sellout, and it's easy to blame her. She keeps telling you to ice your face, and you only nod. Your throat is tight, and you feel strangely like crying. You are angry that you do. You know she can see it. You know she feels guilty. You let it be.
Thank you, Sarah. And it's such a powerful piece, and I feel like the work itself and the descriptions of the treatment, it's so powerful. And I think anybody who's ever had any kind of laser thing knows exactly what that air feels like, just shooting into your nose. Yeah. It's very scary. But I think that what spoke to me the most was how existing in a kind of under this patriarchal gaze and existing underneath this shadow of a beauty standard, it affects everything. And at the fundament of it, at least in this essay, it affects the narrator's relationship with her mother, who means well. And this is like this sort of, what do you think of that sort of conflict where you have women in one's life who mean well and they want you to look nice and they're doing it for you, but it's also this sort of well intent that you don't necessarily want or even need, one could argue.
Yeah. So I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because that's definitely like one of the big things that I struggled with writing this essay, but also putting it out into the world, right? Mm-hmm. Because this gaze that you're constantly under, right? Like there's this ideal of womanhood that you have to be constantly projecting whether you are that or not, right? And everything in your life, the people who care about you yourself, are trying to move your image closer and closer to that ideal, and that can put a big strain on your relationships when your version of that ideal is so different from the people you love, right? So one of the, it's weird when you write an essay this personal, the narrating voice becomes more of a character than you yourself. So like, when I think about this, I think of the character, right? And he has this inner conflict, right? Okay, I want to look nice because I know I don't look nice, but I also have all of these principles, and like where do those go?
It's a really important thing, and I think that we'll sort of talk about this as we move along also, is as a woman, when you write a personal essay, you're putting yourself out into the world in a very particular way and in a very personalized way. And sure, like you said, on one level, your narrator becomes a character and not you directly.
Yeah.
But a lot of people never read it that way.
I mean, I feel like one of the things that we don't realize is that in our society, like women are codified as so exclusively private that any public act becomes, it sort of filters back into the private in a weird way. Like, you know how we say that the personal is political? Well, when you're a woman and you're putting something like this out in front of the public, the political becomes once again deeply personal, right? Now, this essay, for instance, and I'm sure most of us feel this way, but like when you put words out into the world or you put anything out into the world for people to see, you then you can't distinguish the public from the private anymore. You have to come home and deal with the existence of that thing and how your mother relates to it, how your father relates to it, how your brothers see it now that you have done this big...
You've planted a flag of your words out there on that mountain. Okay, here I am, and I'm not taking it back.
Yeah.
But I think that is just wonderful. Thank you for sharing your words with us. And while we're talking about our bodies and this idea of inhabiting your body and recognizing your true self inside of yourself, I want to now move to Anguin Abbas, whose essay is called Moti Sand. And before we talk about the essay, Anguin, will you read for us?
Hi, yeah. So I'll just start. I'd like to believe that the appeal to my health is earnest. But it's not easy to when both of my parents can hardly stop themselves from bringing up how I will be getting married soon enough. With every passing year feeling like a noose tightening around my neck. The rules are that if I'm not pretty enough, I won't find someone who is willing to marry me. In a society where honor is so tightly tied to my existence as a woman, I understand the fear. Try and imagine the shame you would feel as otherwise upstanding member of society whose daughter is unable to attain a suitable and honorable enough match, who struggles to get married because she's too fat. Try and imagine being the mother who feels like she didn't raise her daughter correctly because she doesn't care about the things that are supposed to make her a woman. Your daughter, who is otherwise smart enough and a decent daughter, but so badly dressed, so unkempt, so fat. For my parents, I know that it's the one thing that they wish I could get right, so I can finally be the good daughter they've always hoped for. And I can understand it most days, I really can. The problem is that it doesn't stop hurting even when I can. Being a fat woman and trying to be respected is a constant battle during which even close friends will betray you. I've also made peace with the fact that there are many people I know and interact with and love who do think I'm grotesque. And that isn't okay, but it also doesn't matter much, because who doesn't? Some of them will deny it, many will try to soften the blow, but it will always be a wall between us that can't be breached by repeated insistence that they only care about weight when it's about them. There are times in my life that I'd rather they just let out the truth about how much they despise fatness so we could stop talking around it. And then there are times when I appreciate that they at least try to be civil in a world where people simply don't believe you deserve decency. You also hate to talk about it. In a country like Pakistan, where women are killed for a lot less than not being conventionally attractive, it feels like navel-gazing at best. The voice in my head constantly asks me, is this really the worst thing you could be dealing with? Is this not the most upper-class Sunni woman concern for you to have? And on another level, it's just not cool to acknowledge your pain, unless it can be turned into a sardonic tweet, unless you can laugh at the ridiculousness of the way the world treats you in an unaffected way. It just sounds like Rundi Rona to write 2,000 words that could have easily been a diary entry. Being vulnerable is passé, and only really seen as mining parts of your personality for something interesting enough to win a writing prize. Is this really the worst thing you could be dealing with? Is this not the most upper-class Sunni woman concern for you to have?
Thank you. I love it when writers read their own work. It really brings the text alive in this most magnificent way. And I'm so glad that you read the bit that I wanted to specifically highlight. But because I think that part was so poignant for me about how not being conventionally attractive becomes a commentary on how your mom raised you. And by you, I mean a general you, where when we don't fit into boxes that are known and accepted and understandable, and we're kind of different or offbeat or just different in any way, there's such an anxiety around that, because it then, the whole enterprise is not about you, the individual. It's about you and your place in your family dynamic, and how somehow it becomes a multi-level failure.
You are never really your own self, are you?
Mm-hmm.
My entire existence is a project, and my entire existence is sort of planned in a way that I have to tick a few boxes, I have to accomplish a couple of things, and I have to make sure that everything that my parents have worked for, in a sense, was for something.
Yeah.
I always find it really interesting when people that I know or people from my family sort of more generally talk about the importance of like making something of yourself to keep that going.
Yeah.
And it's sort of completely divorced from like you as an individual.
Yes, absolutely. It sort of physical or physicality then seems to then just completely obliterate your identity as an individual. And it's already so hard to carve out that individual space. As a woman, I feel in this particular milieu, it's hard to be an individual. And then on top of that, if you don't look the right way, like, for example, I have curly hair, you have curly hair. I'm sure you've been told a million times, shouldn't you just get a keratin? I don't like it. And then everybody thinks you're lying.
My two greatest rebellions in this life so far, beyond still being fat, are A, to stop straightening my hair, and B, to get this nose ring.
Good for you. But isn't it just never ceases to astonish me how even now it's still such a grand, it almost, like Sarah was saying, it even just something as small as this becomes like this political, it becomes a statement. There's something political about hanging on to it and just saying no. It's just a refusal on one level that no, I don't want to do that. Thanks. But it's become a statement. And it kind of ties into this idea I also feel about, and this is part of like the discourse generally in a larger sort of sense also about women who are fat, is that you take up more space. And there's this whole idea that women shouldn't be taking up so much space, either physically or intellectually or sort of in public spheres, that you should be shrinking yourself to fit. And it makes people nervous when you aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all sort of about not having a presence. Like, I feel like something that I've heard a lot in my life, mostly in a negative way from many aunties, is my very loud voice or the fact that I take up space in these ways. And I think something I've sort of been thinking about recently is both how we can as individuals take up more space as well as create more space for other people. And I think it's a really delicate balance in many ways. Because we don't have a lot of individual spaces, as you said. We don't have a lot of room to be people. But I think we're also very detached from any sense of a community at large. And I think those things are really important. I think ultimately that is what you need to move forward.
Yeah.
Like, I think I'm very conscious of the fact that even being on this panel, I am taking up space in a sense.
Yeah.
And I'm very much a part of a space that, you know, as someone who has grown up upper middle class, that I feel at home in a sense.
Yes.
And I can't really take away this political aspect from my writing or from my presence here, or from even the existence of sort of these festivals. And I think it's worth thinking about,
But I think that what you said about the balance is really important, because we take up space, but if we take up space mindfully, then we are perhaps also then trying, I suppose that the intention is to kind of build a narrative and build a community where different narratives have a space. And if we make space, then others will follow. Like, did you have people reach out to you after reading the essay and say that, it really helped them articulate a lot of their experiences?
Honestly, I think that was perhaps like the most humbling part of this entire process. Like, I think it really did mean the world to me when like people would sort of message me and be like, "Hi, I read this piece. I thought it was great. I relate to these things." And, I got a lot of responses from people I knew who had lost a lot of weight. And it really struck me how, a lot of them were like, "This resonates with me so much. And honestly, it does not get better." You're not free of scrutiny just because you manage to, lose 20 pounds or something. It doesn't end.
No,
which
that's true.
It's really sad, but in a sense, it's also comforting to recognize that, there's no winning. You are not going to win against the patriarchal system. There's no way you are going to sort of save yourself.
Yeah. But I suppose that the only way of saving oneself is to just kind of be oneself, and to kind of just unabashedly and as bravely as possible just go out and just take it. I know it's easier said than done, but I suppose in a way, creating narratives that help others to kind of also understand what they're going through and to kind of voice their own traumas is, I think, a really important and political act, which I think that we all need to sort of keep on doing.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking a lot about safe spaces and the occupancy of space. And I think this is where we kind of now circle to Rania Hussain, who also happens to be the winner of the 2020 prize. And I feel like a lot of Rania, your essay does address these ideas of safe spaces and how we interact, how our personal sort of life, our personal self, our personal body interacts with the outside world. And I love that there was a phrase in your essay about forced meticulousness, about how women are taught to kind of, be soghar, put things in their place, to kind of know how to operate in society in a particular way, to be particular. And I suppose that also includes, like Anbi said, about losing a bunch of weight. That's also kind of thing that maybe that's one thing you can control about your surroundings or your environment, is what you look like.
Forced meticulousness, when I used it, was sort of to refer to the invisible sort of aspect of like all of the labor that women are forced to do. Like not only like domestically in the household, but also like, as Anguin was saying, like on themselves, on their own bodies, and like on the way they present themselves to the world. Like you have to pay such close attention to every aspect of your own self, and not as an internal like, oh, I'm going to pay attention to myself as an act of love. You sort of are forced to pay attention to yourself from the outside perspective, from like these rooted ideals of patriarchy. And it becomes sort of, my whole essay was sort of about trying to figure out how to exist in a way that sort of undid that, or that sort of resisted that.
Yeah, and the sort of the prescribed gaze, and I was thinking to T.S. Eliot about how you have to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. And none of those faces are your true self. It is always one mask, another mask, and they're sort of interchangeable. But which one of them is you? And how do you find that person when you're constantly sort of surrounded, you're being infringed upon in so many ways? But before we get into that, Rania, will you read a little bit for us?
Yes, I will. So I'm going to read the openings of the essay. So womanhood is an abstract, formless thing, like an old god or an undiscovered island. To me, it means waking up at 8 a.m. to dust the living room, open up the window, and let in the light. It means a body that is soft and giving and kaleidoscopic. Here are my bird-boned ankles, here are my scarred knuckles, here are my floral neck. I met a boy once who told me he couldn't joke with women. They were too sensitive. I suppose, to him, womanhood was the complete lack of a punchline. A serious snail-like thing curling away from laughter and salt. There are certain symbols of womanhood that have collected in our subconscious, the detritus of constant misdefinition. A woman is a candy bar. No, she is a suffering thing, what poet Kaveh Akbar would call a poor deer, run over and over and over by every passing car, and still, standing in the glow of the headlights. A woman is a metaphor. Wait, no, she is a biological certainty, a fixed chromosomal truth. Wait, a woman is a giver of life. A woman is silver earrings and 5 different kinds of organic conditioner. A woman is salad for lunch and bile for dinner. A woman is a touched, untouched, virginal whore.
So how far do you think, Rania, how much does it impede one to not be able to navigate a public space in a safe way? And this sort of thing, this constant sort of anxiety that we all have in the back of our mind that somebody's watching and somebody's listening and somebody might touch you. And it does happen, and it happens all the time. And it's informed us, and I think it's seeped into one's consciousness so much that, like, at what point do we start thinking that this is something that we chose? Or is it something that we've just now internalized that deeply?
I think that, being a woman in Pakistan, it changes the way you can move through the country, obviously. It makes you hyper aware of your own body.
Yes.
You sort of float above it, like, oh, is my dupatta right? Like, is the sleeve too short? Is everything okay? Is everything covered? Like, you're floating above yourself, sort of looking at yourself from external perspectives, hyper aware. And, there are moments, I think, that you find in this country where you sort of feel like, maybe there is something, maybe I can exist carefree, but almost always you're like inevitably brought back into that hyper awareness. Like, what I'm thinking of specifically is things like Aurat March. So that collectivity and that community and sort of gathering together and being like, okay, yes, I will move through this space in a way that is, like loud, public, comfortable. But again, like, no matter, it seems like it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, or 1 step forward, 2 steps, whichever one it is. You're moving backward, always.
The more backwards. Yeah, but isn't it so weird and sort of in a sad way, is that this hyper awareness, instead of leading us to some kind of sort of the hyper awareness only makes us conscious of our body as an object that we aren't really living in. And like, I feel like every time that maybe I've been like harassed on the street, I just wanted to be over, just fast. So you, again, in hyper-awareness, where you just kind of disconnect yourself from what's happening. And that's seen in the essay also, where, the guy on the motorcycle, things, that sort of thing happens so much that at that point, you just want to kind of recede inside yourself and be like, just close that door and say, yeah, okay, I'm rolling up my window and I can't engage.
So much of womanhood is being taught to fear your own body and being taught to fear the aspect of yourself that is like seen and out in the world. Like, like, it's just when a woman goes out and is harassed, like, obviously, like, every woman deals with trauma differently. Every woman will respond differently. But for me, like, the moment that I write about in my essay, it's my earliest memory of being harassed. And it made me want to not leave my house. I was just like, okay, cool. I will just stay inside forever now, and then I will be safe. But that's not even true for so many women. Like, being at home isn't any measure of safety. So
no, it's not. So much violence happens at home as well for so many people.
So it's about trying to carve out a space where you feel safe, and in that safety you sort of empower other women to exist in sort of an unapologetic way.
Do you feel that narrative and community, like Anguin and I were talking about, community is like one really fantastic way to start engendering a feeling of safeness amongst women?
I absolutely do. I absolutely agree. I feel like so much of Pakistani womanhood is defined by these patriarchal markers of like, this is how you should behave and this is how you should be. But I feel like it's starting to be, and it should be, more defined by the sense of community, by the sense of empathy, by the sense of collective struggle and collective resistance. Because gender isn't inherent, right? It's just it's sort of this patriarchal category that's imposed from above. But because you inevitably exist in those categories, you also have to form bonds within them and resist from within them.
Quite right. And even this whole idea of it doesn't look nice, it's not appropriate, what will people say, all of these things are just hemming us in annoying ways. And I think that it's just really encouraging to see this kind of writing out in the world where we're all kind of pulling back the band-aids on these things and saying, no, here we are. And the only way to kind of peel back that is to write. And I think that sort of now steers me to Yamna Baloch and her wonderful essay Inheritance, where she is talking about a very important person in her life. And in telling her story, we begin to sort of see how one woman finds different forms of resistance to those labels, to those boxes, to sort of coming to terms with her own life and the ways that she's found to really find herself and really live an authentic or at least fulfilling or true life, true to herself, and as much as possible. So, Yamna, could you read for us?
So I've chosen a couple of passages, different passages from the essay. It's a bit from the beginning and then a bit from the middle and the end. So I'm just going to read that for you. I will never quite rest easy with the knowledge that there will always be more of Appa to reconstruct from hearsay than from memory. Not for lack of memories, but for the effervescent excess of Appa. After all, I knew her so well and so many facets of her at that. But every time I thought I was done unfurling, divining from her stories the histories she had lived, she would slant her neck mischievously and look at me from some new angle she had never looked at me from before, her omniscient, oceanic eyes beaming as though to say, "Yumni, catch me if you can," and unleash on me some new anecdote to make herself entirely unrecognizable again. And I would be left, vociferously chasing her down yet another rabbit hole, wondering if this particular story might finally reveal to me the compass of her life. Which it didn't, of course. Appa, the shapeshifter. She died 2 years ago, and I have been wondering ever since what kind of eulogy to write. How do you grieve someone you are still in the process of knowing? On winter mornings, we would eat oranges under the attentive Lahore sun, and she would ask to be wheeled along the rows of pansies bordering her garden. She would observe intricately the shades within petals and implore me to understand their beauty. Look at how the white fades into purple, she would say, bewildered, as though the possibility of such a thing deserved her undivided wonder. Often, Appa would recite poetry. She could summon with the bat of an eyelid, with the swift flourish of a spacious, handsome hand, Nasir Kazmi's city emptied of lovers, or Baba Bulle Shah's merciless timekeeper on the night of union. And they would be in our instant service. In her eyes, there would be the loss of Abbi. She would tell me how she fought to organize the first mushaira in her women's college, and how it was impossible to understand poetry without loving somebody first. Other times, Appa would shed suddenly the encumbrance of tact and tell a joke about a penis at a family gathering and leave us all reeling. She came to food with similar recklessness. I never did understand her Kashmiri palate or her light, salty tea, but I learned from her how to relish food, how to bask in the purity of its pleasure. She could look at a plate of pulao with a lust in her eyes that would make a debaucher blush. When diabetes got the better of her, and her children inflicted on her the grave injustice of limiting her rice intake, she'd wait for them to leave the room at mealtimes and pile biryani frantically onto her plate, a bulging, watchful eye on the doorway. After my Dr. Khala forbade her from smoking, I often encountered her Marlboros on bathroom windowsills. Appa believed in indulgence like it was a matter of principle. Appa's was a distinctly ungrandmotherly love, devoid of doting fanfare and loud affection. The 5 years that I had with her, the first 5 years of my 20s, were the years I was learning to be a woman in Pakistan, learning to make myself malleable and concave, to mold myself cavernously to the unyielding sharpness of unfamiliar objects, to speak in stern, humorless murmurs. Instead, Appa taught me appetite. She extolled the virtues of braving war drums, making secret music, telling vulgar jokes, and singing sonorously from the stomach. She taught me how to temper agony with verse and write verse from agony. She gave me the strangely comforting assurance that I will always have the option available to me of marveling at how a flower petal empurples. In death, Appa taught me the lessons I was less eager to learn. She taught me strength and forced me to countenance my seemingly endless capacity to bear. It was as though she had decided that only the most callous kind of grief would do for me. The lonely kind of grief, the long distance kind of grief, the can't make it to the funeral kind of grief. I inherited from Appa my fingers, my frame, my name, and other things I am still learning about.
Thank you, Yamna. That was wonderful. I love that you write so wonderfully about Appa and Appa's appetite. And for me, Appa's appetite for so many things, for life, for love, for relationships, for flowers, for beauty. It's just, for me, it feels like an act of resistance. And again, this goes back to what Sarah was saying about how just existing in the world becomes a political thing. And it's some people feel uneasy with this idea of, how living a full life can be political, but it is. And I feel like in her own way, Appa was she is such a vibrant person in the essay. Do you feel like that the appetite for her is a form of resistance and sort of pushing back at boundaries and not being a typical grandmother or a typical wife?
I think that generally appetite is not something women are expected to have. It almost
or encouraged to have.
Whether it's an appetite for food, whether it's desire, whether it's an appetite to kind of go out and do things. Women are sort of expected to be these demure, silent creatures, and so. I do think that just those basic acts of having an appetite for food or for song or for dance, even if it's not a consciously political move, when you're living in the backdrop of this society that is expecting silence from you, that is expecting you to shrink, even just kind of living your life in that way becomes a form of resistance.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a bit in your essay where you write about how the fight is long and the rage is consuming. And it reminds me of Brecht in Mother Courage, where she asks a soldier that, do you have the long rage? And I feel like so much of the women's movement has been about nurturing and fostering that long rage, is to have that fight in you. And by rage, I don't mean that you sort of go out and set fire to things. Maybe you could. Arson is not good. But that sense of not giving up on yourself, or not giving up on what you believe, or not just not giving up. Sort of this desire to sort of keep pushing, even in a small way, even if it's to keep smoking your cigarettes secretly in the bathroom, to sort of keep going.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, if it's sort of through these smaller acts of resistance that you can, I suppose, sustain that protest through a long period of time. And for me, I think it really also ties into this idea of personhood, right? If you're doing, if you're sort of going out and doing things and singing songs and being loud and taking up space, it's sort of this acknowledgement of your own wants and your own desires, and to kind of divorce yourself from that idea of having an identity as a victim, or having an identity as a person who is suffering, or a person who is marginalized, which is not to say that's not an element of your identity. But I think it's through these forms of protest that you sort of reclaim that personhood in a certain sense.
Not everybody can can go out, and not everybody can march, and not everybody can be an activist, but you can at least keep your own little flame alive. And I'm interested here because a lot of our essays talk about a direct sort of mother-daughter relationship, but this essay talks about a grandmother. So do you feel like, because there is a sort of jumping of a generation in the writing of it, do you feel like it was different because there is some space there? And also, of course, Appa is an unconventional person. But do you feel like that sense of identity or personhood or knowing yourself through the women you come from, was it a little different because it was a grandmother as opposed to a mom?
I think so, in the sense that I would say my mother, for example, has generally lived a more liberated life in a lot of ways than Appa did, for example. I think Appa's life was probably even more limited. And in the old age that I saw her in this time of immobility, it was even more limited perhaps than it had previously been. And so I think for me, it was just sort of looking at the way she was living her life, even at that age when it was so narrow and there was such she could actually go out and experience. But still watching her keep that spirit alive, I think that's what was really interesting for me. And I made it particularly poignant, I suppose.
Yeah. And as a reader, it's so astonishing to have these details that she is bedridden, that she is in a wheelchair, but somehow you never get that sense of her being limited by any of these things. Like, she's so present and she's so engaged with the world around her, and really in a one-on-one, in such an individual way also, where she's looking at the flowers or she's eating, and she's inviting everybody to share that experience. And it's just a really warm and wonderful description of living with an older person. So I think our conversation now sort of very organically steers us to Aisha Alize Arbab and her wonderful essay, Bad House. So, but before we ask her questions, we'd love for you to read, Alize.
The color of this house. We made the wrong decision to paint it this. It's bare, lifeless. My mother says this in Sindhi, sitting on a chair outside next to the car. She never sits in the garden, but right here in the parking. Alize, what if we rent out the ground floor? Where do you think we can place an exterior staircase? She asks. I don't reply. I have now stopped replying to my mother's questions of changing or moving objects in houses. It is difficult to reconcile my mother's hatred for this house with reality. If I was to believe her, the reality is this. We are 6 people living in a bad house together. We are 6 people often in the same room. It's the only good room in the house. My father lies on my sister's bed. I sit on the sofa cum bed. My sister is using her laptop on the study table. The youngest is on a mattress playing a game. My mother on the carpet. She is trapped in this world. My brother in his room. She is trapped with him too. The pandemic has made my mother stop talking about moving out for now. With that comes relief, but the desire of moving out always remains. The more a person in this house desires to run, the more we all move in. The dialogue of escape, of change becomes a part of the conversation. This dialogue is a lot like my father's rage against the clocks in this house that stop working. The many clocks that are left that way until he notices that they have been left. My mother's conversation with this house has been like my father's conversation with clocks. Do they expect a response from the clock that stopped ticking? Does she wait for the house to speak when she too laments? It is just a house. How can a house be so bad? How can it inflict pain when I have only witnessed people inflicting pain? But then why do I hate it? Why does it make me feel like the way I do? This house has been so horrible to my mother, is the voice that echoes in my head. Is it my voice? Is it my mother's voice? Is there any distinction between our desires? I keep thinking about the refusal of the washrooms to function, the broken photo frames and the crooked pictures that none of us tried to replace because we know they'll only get broken again. Perhaps that is all it takes for a house to be bad. It can't hold us when the rage erupts, when words are said, when bodies are used to hate and hurt. It becomes our image. Was this the only bad house my mother has ever lived in? No, there have been many. The apartment that my parents saved up to buy is called Al Habib Pride Apartments in Civil Lines. My memory of this house often comes back to me, but it is always in pieces. Still, I remember this one moment of my mother standing in the little kitchen of in the little street of this apartment, between the room and the kitchen, next to the intercom, crying. My mother was telling my father that she can't do this, that she'll run away. In my memory, the parking lot of Al Habib Pride is ever expansive, with many places a child could just disappear. I remember the first knock on the door in the apartment. I don't remember our flat number. A young girl and boy had knocked on the door and asked my mother if there were any kids in this flat that they could play with. My mother had said, yes, there are kids, take them. I was dumbfounded. These kids did this to every apartment in every block. When I went down to the parking lot with them, we played hide and seek and run for 6 hours straight. We were more than 20 kids. 20 mothers had handed their kids to these 11-year-olds. While writing this, it is difficult to think back because I feel very stuck in this room where everyone wants to speak but no one wants to listen. It is difficult to imagine I am alone. The shape of my mother's body, I can feel it surround me as my back lies against the bed where she lies too. To write this essay while my mother begins to lament her children is precisely why this house is bad. We are half children, half adults. We are extensions of this house. Bad house, bad children.
Okay, thank you for that. So you're an architect yourself, and it's really intriguing to me to see how it becomes sort of a twofold finding of language, where as an architect, you begin to find language for the bad house and why it's bad, and you know the kind of technicalities behind that. But as a daughter, one finds language to kind of unravel the technicalities of what it means to be home and what home means to a family where the mom, who, you know, in so many ways is the center of a family, like it or not. But to kind of find a vocabulary to understand how you understand home for yourself, when home doesn't look like anything that you think it should.
I really appreciate the way you talked about language in your question. And I think that is exactly why writing this essay was such an interesting process for me. Because, like you said, as an architect, I was looking at what is technically wrong with this house, but I also feel like as an architect, I was also thinking about, okay, how are all these things connected? And even as a daughter, who was trying to figure out what is home, or like, do I belong here? And similarly, I guess with my mother, that is also the same questions that she asks herself. I was also trying to think about more than it beyond being a daughter, and how so many other things are connected to that. And in a way, space is connected to that. And in a way, space is also connected to mental health. And in a way, space is also connected to class and social mobility. And it's connected to gender. And how all these different experiences kind of merge together is where I was trying to articulate or develop a language from a place that could only come from me. Because I could have written like an analysis of all the houses in Karachi and how they might not work for women, how, say, the way kitchens are designed in all of Karachi, how they have bad ventilation, and how the design of the kitchens affects the mental health and the physical health of women in a way. And I could have, as a daughter, just talked about depression and how I struggle with it, or how my mother struggles with it. But this, as the personal essay became this really interesting space where I could explore things in a very connected way, and without having to even address them directly, I just had to express myself and try to kind of get that out. And I feel like that taught me a lot as an architect, as a daughter, and so much more as a feminist as well.
I also found it really interesting how Bad House discusses an intersection of gender, of mental health, and social mobility, and how there is this anxiety, especially it seems in women, because they're again seen as the driving force behind a family, where so many successful men are successful because their wives had a vision, or children are successful. And we've talked about this previously as well, about how successful children are also like trophies for their mom. But what happens to families when moms realize, or women realize, that they've been told a lot of lies essentially about what should make them happy? And when that doesn't make them happy, then where do you stand? And how do you learn to navigate that space and your life, really?
Well, when everything I was told was a lie, I became a feminist. So maybe people can start with that. Okay, to speak about it generally, I feel like you need to first examine the unhappiness and realize that happiness is political. That you're not just going to be happy if you look for your own happiness alone. We can't be free until all of us. You can't be free until all of us are free. That's what I really believe when it comes to happiness. And that's what writing Bad House was for me, because I could have literally written this essay about bad university, bad workplace, bad school, bad madrasa, and it would still be true, because we literally live in a world where there's a mental health crisis. Patriarchy has existed before I was born, before my mother was born, before my grandma was born. There is a housing crisis. We live in a capitalism. We live in a capitalist society, and we have to realize that our happiness is connected to all of those things. And the answer, like many people already said on this panel, is that the answer is a collective politics. And that's what writing this essay taught me. Because just like my mother, how for my mother a better house did not give her happiness, perhaps for us young women, being a girl boss or being financially independent alone is not going to make us happy in the truest sense. If the system is the same, if the structure of the house is still the same, and somebody else is still being exploited, or we are playing the role of the oppressor, God forbid, and that is not going to give us happiness. And that is what we need to realize, that we need to work to change this entire system. It's not just the person's fight. It's not just about changing attitudes. It's material. And the whole thing needs to change. All of it. That's what you need to start with to try to be happy.
Thank you so much. And now to our last essayist of this panel, Tuba Masood Khan, who wrote the wonderful, startling, and urgent essay called Fathers, Be Good to Your Daughters. And before a question, please, Tuba, read for us.
My mother has this reoccurring dream that my father has come to get her. He always arrives in a yellow FX, his first car. He clears his throat and shouts, "Come on, we're getting late." "I'm not ready," she shouts back and starts to panic. She panics because she can't tell if he's really there or not. You see, my father's been dead 5 years now. I was there when they buried him. "I can almost touch his face, beta," she says to me. I try to calm her down, but it doesn't work. She is certain that it's her turn now. And this is a direct message from God. Her other explanation is he wasn't ready to go, so he keeps coming back. I wonder if she's right, or if this is just her anxiety or loneliness, or if Baba really has unfinished business down here. But then I wonder, why isn't he coming to me? Our relationship wasn't the best, so shouldn't he come and make amends, or at least explain what happened that night? The date and time is etched in my brain, April 17, 2015, 8 p.m. The worst night of my life. How do I even begin to talk about it? It is still so surreal to me. It was 8 p.m. and I was at work when Amma called. She couldn't get in touch with Baba. She said he'd gone to pray at a mosque close by and hadn't come back. They had to go to a dinner later that night, so she wanted to know what to iron for him. Praying was a new thing for him. He'd been an atheist his entire life and had suddenly found God. Don't know when or how, but he started going to the mosque, donating to the madrasa. It was all very out of character for him. To be honest, there should have been a red flag for me, but I was just not interested. I didn't want to deal with him.
I think that the essay is also so important because it talks about how we deal with grief and how we mourn a parent. And the loss of a parent is this colossal, and it's a monumental grief in every person's life. But I was also thinking about how do you mourn a parent while they're still alive? Because so many parents are absent from people's lives and families' lives, even though they're there, but they're also not there. And many times troubled relationships with parents mean that we don't have that kind of emotional intimacy with them that we crave as children and as people. As you know, you feel like you belong to your parent, but they don't belong to you. And that's also a very particular kind of grief.
I think that's a really good question. Like, I feel like many times, many people don't take into consideration the father's role in bringing up children and generally in the household. Like, a father just isn't, someone who's there to discipline his kids or, make sure there's food on the table and all that. It's so much more. And I feel like the relationship gets complicated when you start standing up for yourself or for a weaker person in the family. And I feel like that relationship gets really complicated over time because at one point you don't know how to respond to each other. And I feel with me and my father, we drifted apart several years ago, and then it was very difficult for us to connect. And even though both of us did want to reach out, it was just something that didn't happen. And it took me years after his death to actually verbalize and express myself and, really, really understand what I was going through because there's no manual on, grief or how to deal with someone who's always been there and then is not. So, yeah, I hope that answers your question. The second one about how one mourns or grieves the parent who you have a troubled relationship with when they're living and not. I think this is an excellent question, particularly because it is so difficult to mourn someone who has caused you so much pain. There's no manual for grief. There's no manual for mourning. So it's really difficult, and you really have to navigate it yourself. When my father passed away, my best friend called me out from Canada, and his first words were, "Welcome to the Dead Daddies Club." And I I don't know, but it just made me laugh, because I was like, oh wow, like, that's one more thing we have in common now. But I feel like one way that I grieved was I found people who were like me, who lost a parent, and it helped me deal, because I would see how they were dealing with it, and we would talk to each other. But otherwise, like, I think on a personal level, it's just really difficult, because what you've gone through with a parent, or the experience that you've had with a parent, other people have not. When I wrote this essay, I was really afraid, because I did not know how people would react because of my father's personality. Like, people knew him, and like it was a little, it made me feel really vulnerable, very open. But I told my mother about it, my brother, and they were very supportive, and I feel like that gave me confidence, because at the end of the day, I feel like it was something that I was telling people, I was sharing. And what actually really, I think, helped me.
Thank you so much, everybody, for watching and listening to this wonderful conversation. Thank you, panelists, for sharing your work and putting yourself out there and putting your wonderful ideas out there, which it's just all of you, I feel, and the long list also, are just a real beacon of community and solidarity and comradeship, where at least I felt like that when I read everybody's work. And it's just really special. And I know it's very daunting to put yourself out into the world like this, but thank you so much for all the courage. The Zenith, you can read everybody's essays, the short list and the long list, on the Zenith Haroon Writing Prize website, which is zhrwritingprize.com. Entries for the 2021 entries for the 2021 competition are opening on the 1st of April. And for 2021, the prize is inviting fiction writing this year. So it's not an essay, it's a chance to bust out your fiction writing chops. 1st of April on their website. And thank you all for watching. And, thanks for hanging out with women of the world. Bye.